Hello and welcome to the Successful Mentalist podcast. My name is Ashley Green and this is episode 31. Now it is December, which means, guys, that we are getting ready. We're all in the festive spirit and we're looking forward to Christmas, including, the co-host of this podcast, Aidan O'Sullivan, who is with me for every single podcast. But as it's December, he's wearing a fantastic elf t-shirt. Not that you guys can see it, but that very much fits the theme of today's podcast because we're talking about topical shows.
Well, exactly that. And just for all of you listeners, I am going for comfort over style here. Don't judge me because of my Christmas attire, although I am looking at myself right now and I do think it is a marvellous piece of style. I do look like a fabulous Christmas elf, but that's beside the point. Today we're going to be talking about topical shows. And by that, what we kind of want to break it down into a few key areas and so you guys know what the direction is going to be. We're going to start by talking all things seasonal shows, for example, Christmas, Halloween, Easter, like these shows that revolve around key events or key seasons. We're then going to be talking about themed shows. So it's slightly different, but that's where there's a specific key theme that runs throughout the show or is the backbone of the show, and a lot of the problems that come associated with that. And then we're going to be talking about underplayed themes. So these are the themes or the topics that are really kind of just thrown in, but not really done. And I'll admit, hand on heart, I have been guilty of this. I've done this on several occasions before, so I'm talking first-hand experience at that point. But let's begin. Let's talk about seasonal shows. Ashley, I'm going to ask you a nice simple question. Should we be doing seasonal shows?
Oh, do you remember that podcast where you asked me a question last time and I went, yeah, I'm going to give you an answer. Yes and no. And I feel it's another one of those yes and no. Look, at the end of the day, my personal opinion is if you want to do a seasonal show, go ahead and do it. Like, I'm pretty sure your audience are going to be like, oh my God, he's doing a Christmas show. Oh my God, he's doing a Halloween show. But then at the same time, if you don't want to do a seasonal show and you just want to do your regular show, yeah, go for it. Like, I personally believe it's entirely down to what you want to do, which revolves around a lot of stuff, to be quite honest, in magical mentalism. But the main thing is this question often comes up to me. And I see it a lot, especially in forums, and it's will do in a seasonal show break your character? And honestly, I think the answer is no. Like for me, you know, Aidan, I have this really weird, dark, and crazy character that I would not encourage anyone to do because it's weird. But doing a Christmas show or an Easter show, it wouldn't take away from my character. It would just make it interesting. And I suppose the main thing is just not to make it like a cliche. So as long as you can actually do it well, yeah, go for it. But again, you don't have to. It's entirely down to what you want. And I appreciate, like, I've literally just given an answer here. And the audience are none the wiser. They're like, so my views are do it if I want. But at the same time, don't do it if I also don't want to. But that's my view, if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense. I think what's really important to notice is obviously getting that sort of understanding of why you want to do it in the first place. Do you want to do a specific theme show? And again, to be completely crystal clear, what we're meaning here is shows that are overtly themed. And we use Christmas as an example. For example, an overt Christmas themed show and it's like, by all means, you dress up as Santa or something, or like whatever. We're talking about shows that are specifically laced with a Christmas theme, whether you do tricks surrounding sort of gifts that you would give at Christmas, and you really tailor it to the event and to the season or to the whatever's going on. And these are the sort of questions. And Ashley, you brought up a really interesting point about, well, how like would that implement or affect my character in any way? And I think that's a really important discussion to be had. For you, I think that obviously you've got this kind of dark, mysterious, weird character. I actually quite like the vision of seeing you doing a show in a Christmas hat, like a Santa hat or something, because it adds such a big difference. But if the average person ends up doing it, somebody who hasn't got such a polarizing character, if they start doing it, it might just be a little bit sort of average in that sense. That doesn't really set anything apart. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the only reason it would be average is if they don't have the confidence. I mean, most of us, let's be honest, most of us listening to this podcast, like performers, and most of us have that confidence to go out and performing. But when you're dressing up as Santa or an elf, or you've got reindeers on stage, maybe your confidence might be knocked a little because you're thinking, oh, this might be embarrassing. And I think when you don't have the confidence to execute these shows, that's when it is a bit mediocre. Like, just actually committing and having that like energy behind you, and you being there like, yes, this is what I'm doing. I don't care I'm dressed as Santa. This is my show and you guys are here to see it. Then your audience will love it. But if you come out on it and you've got that inner belief, it's like, ooh, I'm a little bit uncomfy like doing this. First of all, ask yourself, why are you doing it? Maybe you've made a wrong decision there. And secondly, your audience are going to pick up on that underlying response from you. They're going to be able to read from your body language and like the overt things that you're giving off. And I think it's just going to be an uncomfortable situation for both you and your audience in that situation.
That makes complete sense. I think what's probably easier, rather than saying that in order to do a topical show, you have to dress up as Santa, have reindeers on stage and do tricks, themes. Like I think it's the latter half of that that's more important. The tricks that you're doing, or the material that you're actually using, or the stories that you're telling. And I think the easiest example, rather than sort of Christmas, is actually we've just come out of a Halloween season. Well, I mean, at the time of recording this, we're starting November, so you can hear this Halloween season. And we've had all of these Halloween shows. We've had some crazy Halloween shows pop up, and they're all spooky shows or seance-y shows. And every single year, there's more and more and more of them that we see. And I suppose that's the real question. And for me, on the context of Halloween shows, it becomes very, very predictable. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to not be predictable in that sense. But if you're doing a Halloween show, it very often just ends up boiling to just, oh, I'm just going to do some magic tricks with some spooky themes. And it becomes very sort of flat and weak. And it, as you said, it becomes cliched. And it becomes like everybody is doing it. Or, oh, yeah, if your audience knows what to expect going in, you've done your marketing fairly well, because obviously they should know what they're signing up for. But if they know what you're going to be doing on the get-go, and they can start understanding it from that sort of perspective, from further into the tricks and the material and what the show's going to be like, then you're actually taking out some of the surprise. You're taking out some of the mysteries. You're actually taking away some of that innate essence of what magic and this mentalism, what we should be doing, actually is. We take that away because we tell them too much and we become predictable. And I think that's the big concern from my end about topical shows. You just fall into the obvious trap. For example, I've just said, when you're doing a Halloween show, a typical example is to do a seance, or to make it just a really spooky show. Like, you fall into that trap of, bam, seance. Christmas shows, I've given an example already. Everybody that does a Christmas themed show at least does one trick about, think of a favorite gift or a gift that you might want at Christmas. And it becomes predictable because everyone's doing it. Take Easter, an example for Easter. I've not seen it actually actively myself, but this is an idea that I imagine a lot of people thinking. Having a flipping Easter egg hunt. For us mentalists, we know the contact mind reading, so you're holding the wrist, muscle reading and all of that kind of jazz. A little egg hidden in a room. I've heard people doing that kind of thing an awful lot, and it becomes predictable when your audience can kind of guess where you're going with things. So I suppose that's really my big concern in terms of these topical shows and these seasonal shows more specifically.
Well, that just boils down to people not actually like thinking about it enough, right? Like, not actually putting in the work, just thinking, what is Christmas? Oh, yeah, Rudolph's there. Why don't I have Rudolph holding a reveal? You can see how much effort I've put into that. Like, a few seconds. Like, if you want to have a good show, you've got to sit down and I think we've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, especially with, one of our students at the school, Sammy Wigmore. His episode was like writing down all the various different things. And literally maybe write like almost a mood board of everything to do with Christmas and start piecing together like all the different ideas, the things that you like about the Christmas, the things that Christmas represents, the things that you like in general, and start to find connections and start to come up with these ideas. And you'll eventually find something which is different, which you wouldn't have even have had in mind, and something which makes relevant sense. And it's not just you're doing a card trick, but it's Halloween, so instead of playing cards, they've got little pictures of ghosts on them, or it's Christmas, so instead of playing cards, they've got little pictures of elves on them. I really hate that. What is the point? Like, I don't understand. If you're going to do a card trick, just do a card trick. Why do you need to have an elf on it? Like, that makes no difference for me. If you want to do a themed show, do it properly. think about it a little more and start to tie all these connections together and make it about like what you enjoy about that specific event.
That makes complete sense. I'm not going to take that as a personal insult that you hate elves, as I'm wearing an elf shirt right now, but I think the kind of, just to tie into that, I think a common mistake that a lot of people make when doing topical or seasonal shows, I'm going to say it, seasonal shows, is that that's where they start. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to do it. I'm going to do a seasonal show. I'm going to do a Christmas show. I'm going to do a Halloween show. And then instantly you reduce your way of thinking to, oh, what is spooky? Oh, what is festive? And you really narrow it all the way down into those sort of areas. And you're right in saying that if you can expand it by having a look at getting a list of all of the different options inside of like a Christmas themed show. And again, we're using only sort of seasons that we're familiar with. Again, around the world, I know this is going to be different with different cultures, different seasons, but I'm sure that these principles still apply. And if you can start expanding that narrow-minded slot, then you're going to be great. But the way I've done seasonal shows in the past is that I've constructed a really solid show that is a blank canvas, in the sense that all of the routines that I've mapped in, they're really great routines, but none of them have a premise yet. I've intentionally taken that away. And then I can add my premise, and then I can start adding extra bits that will follow the narrative of the actual show, because I now know that I'm not just throwing in tricks because of the sake of it. I'm not going to open a show with, oh, think of a gift that I would like you all to write down a gift that you're thinking of, that you would like for Christmas, and put it into this and then you reveal something later on. Like, I'm not doing it like that. Instead, I would maybe come about to that, but I'd start by saying, how do I get everyone involved from the get-go, and how can I tie that in later? I start writing the routine as a blank canvas, and then maybe I apply something. And I know that sounds like very much the same thing, just done in a different way, but I promise that if you start doing things from this flipped perspective, in terms of focus on the show more than the theme, because the theme and the presentation you can add in later, and it will make your show 10 times better. But if you're writing a show underneath a theme, you sort of cap yourself out. You stop yourself from having a better show and having better material and going bigger with your show and taking things further. And that's sort of a common problem that I've experienced when doing these, and I know a lot of other performers have as well.
Exactly that. Hi guys, it's Ashley here. I just want to quickly interrupt this podcast just to say one little thing. If you do enjoy the podcast that we are currently putting out at The Successful Mentalist, do us a favour and make sure to subscribe. It will honestly help us out. It will mean the world. It will help with our stats and rankings, which mean that we're then shown to more magicians and mentalists around the world. And we want to try and help as many people as possible with these podcasts. So honestly, if you could subscribe, it would mean the absolute world to us. Anyway, back to the podcast. I suppose this is a great time to actually bring up the fact of cringy themes and like the cringiness that comes from doing these topical shows, right? Like, how often do you see someone do a show and it's just like, you look at it and it's, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's really, really tough, because I'm yet to find somebody who has mastered the balance. I've seen performers do a really good job, and I've seen other performers not do a good job of having these themes and these ideas. But I think a common one is that if we take it away from the seasonal for a minute, we can link it back in. But if we take it away from the seasonal, we look at corporate shows. We know a lot of corporate shows that, or a lot of people that do corporate shows, they try and embed a company message into their shows. And while I agree that that's a fantastic idea and there's nothing innately wrong with that, more often than not, the way that is done is terrible. It becomes so cringy and so like you're forcing this message down the throat of your audience. And it's like, well, we work at the company. Of course we know the blooming values, or we know the message. Why are you trying to do every single trick that tailors to that? And I think that's the important distinction. When shows become too much about the theme or too much about the season, it just becomes cringe fest. It becomes really uncomfortable for your audience. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, you've hit the nail bang on. If you take away these topical shows, these seasonal shows, and you just keep it to like even just company messages, like you say, for example, like, I don't know, doing a doing a spectator as mind reader, and then you finish like saying, and that's the power of teamwork, which Microsoft offer. Ah, like, it's just, you've obviously not put any thought into it. And I'm sorry if anyone is listening to this podcast and like they've done that, but it's weak. It's really weak. Like, you need to sit down and, like, I've already said it, write a list of the things you like. Like, if you're going to link it to that, and like, you'll start to find these better points. But it's so easy to fall into this trap, isn't it? And especially when you're trying to put in a message or a theme, because you think sometimes by finishing on something, saying a speech, saying a motivational word, or saying, oh, and when you talk about Christmas, oh, and that means like all the good people will get presents, like, it's really, really weak. I don't know where I was going with that point, and I feel like I've just hated on everyone here. But like, what you've said has literally hit the nail on the head. And if that's not enough to persuade you to think deeper when doing these things, I literally don't know what is.
Well, I think as well, in addition to that, you kind of mentioned it there, but it comes down to everybody does things in the same way. And again, it comes back to that point of being predictable. Everybody that does themed shows, so with a theme running through the show instead of like a seasonal event, or no, this applies as well, actually. This does apply. When you're doing things so overt in that sense, everybody knows everything. And again, we spoke about this earlier in terms of being predictable, but there's nothing interesting because everybody watches it once and then it's rinse and repeat. The whole show, however long it is, everything, if you tailor every single trick to the theme or to the season, again, you put that cap on the top of your show, which means you can't make it even better. And also, you fall into that trap of your audience switching off. And the one way to stop your audience switching off in your shows, from like I have found when doing these kind of shows, is to not plug so hard on the theme or on the idea. You don't have to at the end of every trick, or even at the start of every trick, do a little bit of a presentation that loosely ties that in. Because I think it comes from a sense of, oh crap, I need to justify this. In order to do this trick, I need to justify this. I have to be able to explain why I'm doing this trick to my audience, otherwise they just won't care. And the reality is, when you start justifying it to your audience and you start over-proving things and you start doing that, that's when your audience just doesn't care. And anybody who's done this will be able to tell that from an audience perspective, they don't really remember the premise or the fancy spiel for the most part. They'll remember the flipping trick. So why not boil it down and just do a trick for this period of time in your show? Just do that. And then by default, when you've got those low moments, everything that you do that has an overt theme or is clear to it will hit 10 times as strong because it's completely opposite. And then it now stands out as a Christmas show or as a themed show or a festive show. Oh, like, I know that's the same thing, but does that make sense, Ashley? Like,
Completely. I mean, as well, like the people going away who are going to, like, if you take it from the people booking you or the audience perspective, what are they going to do afterwards? They're going to go away and they're going to say, "Oh, that was a great show. He did some stuff to do with Christmas." That's all they're going to say. But if you work a little bit harder at this and you actually put together a decent show which isn't falling into all the pitfalls we're outlined, we're going to be like, what are they going to say then? They're going to go away and be like, "Oh my God, that was a beautiful piece of theatre. And he actually made it bespoke for the event because of obviously Christmas is coming up. So it's now no longer about Christmas. It's about you making it bespoke." So does that start with actually dialing back, like not putting too much of the Christmas in, just hints?
completely. And I'm just thinking about that. And I think that idea is so profound, like understanding the way that the audience thinks. If it's an overt Christmas show, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, it was a cool show." But if you have a really good show, like, and you build it from that sense, and then you've got the occasional themed bits or the message, obviously we've just established the message is going to come and stand out an awful lot more. And I think that it means that when your audience leaves, they're going to say, "Oh, it was an absolutely fantastic show. Oh yeah, and it was Christmas. There was Christmas hats, and there was like there was snow everywhere," and they're more likely to remember the lengths that you go to theme it up a little bit when you dial it back. And from like, again, this is from my own personal experience. You dial it back and suddenly everything amplifies, and it's like that age-old saying: when you remove one of your senses, all the others are heightened, almost to form a sixth sense. I know a lot of people use that under the premise of a blindfold routine, but the principle applies here. Take out some of the seasonal or the theme shows, and it will all be fine. But I do want to address the fact that a lot of people listening might be thinking the same thing. What if I get booked to do a seasonal show? Or what if I get booked to do a show with a company theme running through it? And I can't really take it out, can I? Because then that's going against what my client wants. So first, how would you handle that situation, Ashley?
I think it starts by understanding exactly what they're after. They say a theme, but understanding the reason why they want that theme, and then having a sit down and then realizing from this all of the pitfalls that you could fall into, and then saying, this is a good way to get their overall message across. Like, they might have come to you and said, oh, can you do a trick to do like where you plug our new brand of sweet corn? I don't know where that example came from, but it just came up. To plug our new brand of sweet corn, and you go, okay. Now, you could just do some silly trick with the can of sweet corn or whatever, where you pull a reveal out of it and then say, it's all thanks to Jerry's amazing sweet corn. Like, that's what most people would do, right? But if we can identify all these pitfalls that happen and then go back to the client and say, I think I've got something, and I think it's a beautiful little thing that everyone's going to love, and it's not going to plug it in a cringy way, and I think your audience will really benefit that. I don't know whether actually addressing that you're not doing it in a cringy way, whether they'll actually be like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. So I don't know whether that's a good way to go for it as well. But actually presenting them with something and saying, this is what I've got, and then explaining it to them. So going back with a new idea. I think that's probably the best way of doing it.
Completely correct. Completely. I completely agree with everything that you just said there. If you can go back to your client and explain to them, well, I mean, our clients, let's face it, our clients are often dreamers. They come to us with crazy ideas or big visions, and even aside from seasonal shows or topical shows, people come to us and they have these crazy ideas about how we can do their event or how we can make their wedding amazing, because they've seen a magician before and their story in their head about what magic at events has been blown up a million times because that's the way it works. If that applies to obviously topical shows, if somebody says that you're doing, or you say that you're doing a Christmas show or a seasonal show or a themed show or whatever, they will come to you with a big inflated idea on how that looks. So if you can go back to your client and say, well, from my own personal experience, doing it this way becomes a little bit sort of cringy in that sense, and just be honest about, yeah, exactly, cliche, just be honest about it. If you can do it like that and then sort of dial it back and then tell them, this is the approach that I think would work best based on what I can offer. And that way, you're actually adding more value to your clients, I would argue. You're not saying no to what they've requested. In fact, you're actively saying yes, but let's do it correct. Let's do it even better. And they're going to trust you because you're the knowledgeable entertainer. You're the knowledgeable performer. You know what it's like doing this stuff. And again, especially if you're a busier worker, or even if you're not, you've got that expert knowledge of what it's like performing. And again, now you've listened to this episode, you can understand some of the problems that a lot of people fall into. But I suppose it is down to that clear-cut communication that you explain, like, this is the situation. This is how I would like to tackle it, and go from there.
That's it. They come to you because you are the professional, right? I mean, if they were the professional, they'd be doing the bloody magic show. You are the expert, and I think at times, like, people forget to remind themselves of that. They are coming to you because they don't know how to do that. That's why they need to book you for this. If they knew how to do it, they'd be up there doing the magic trick with the sweet corn. But they're coming to you. And if they're dictating and directing the way that you're doing your show, then you know it's not going to be as good because they're not experienced in that. So you need to be the one to direct and dictate how the show goes based off their wants and needs, not the other way round.
It goes back down to that idea of, are you comfortable doing what you're doing? If not, don't do it. And are you happy with what it is that you're doing? If not, don't do it. And you should only be working and doing the things that you absolutely want to do and you're committed to, and the things that resonate with you the most. Because if you're just doing it for this, like for somebody else, or just because you need the money, or just because you want the gig, and you actually, not only do you put an inner resistance, like a big psychological bit of resistance in the way of your performance, so it's not going to be the absolute best performance, even if you think it is, it just won't. But it kind of just puts you into that sort of submissive mindset to your clients, and you do it once and you think, okay, that was fine, that was easy. And then a second client comes in and you do the same thing again because you know the easy process, and suddenly you get battered through this entire process of doing not what you're happy to do or not what represents you to the best of your ability. And over time that becomes a habit, and that becomes then a symbol of you as a performer. You will actually become a bad performer the more that this kind of stuff happens, and the more you accept and respond to the exact needs that your client wants. If you can work with them, provide your strengths and your value, in addition to, and this goes way outside of the topical shows, this is like general advice. If you can work with them and communicate with them, then you're going to do great. But there is obviously something else that we wanted to talk about, and we've kind of spoken a lot now about, yes, we should be doing these topical themed shows. They're like a really good idea. If you want to do them, do them. If you do want to do them, however, you're going to have to scale it back a little bit to avoid the cringe. But how do we scale it back without ending up underplaying it and getting to the point that it's like it's a throwaway? It's just like one trick was themed and suddenly you're promoting the whole show as themed. How do we get around that? And I think, I mean, I'm happy to give an overt example of this straight away. So in my local town, we had a fringe week sort of arranged, and I was contacted by the local town council to come and do a show, like headline one of the shows as part of the fringe week. And I thought, fantastic, a golden opportunity. I would love to do this. The theme was sort of space, and because it was actually 50 years of the moon landing. And I thought, brilliant. Yes, I'm on that. I called the show Celestial, and it was really, really sort of interesting. However, my only link to the theme and to everything was all starry themed and all that stuff, and it looks terrible looking back on it now, but my only connection to that theme was that I had a metaphor for the moon landing to close my show. That was it. That was the only bit of connection that I had to space themes, like any of that kind of stuff. It was just, yeah, the ending of my show is a metaphor for the moon landing, and by all means, it hit really, really well. But in that sense, if somebody had booked a ticket to come and see a space-themed magic show, which isn't what it was marketed as, but if that's what happened and that's how they turned up as part of the Fringe Week, I would have under-delivered. And the same applies here. So how do you know, Ashley, when you've taken out too much and when it doesn't feel like a genuine themed show in that sense? Have you got any other thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is down to where probably the run-throughs that you're going to have, either, as we've already discussed, like the creative run-throughs where you go through in your head, you run the full show out and you think, maybe it is lacking, or maybe it's too much. Like, that's the first step, right? Like, we've already understood, like all the listeners of this podcast, if you're regular listeners, how to do that. Practice without practicing, which is nice. But I think as well, actually having like run-throughs and trying like little snippets as well on people around you and getting actual feedback first. Like, if you can do that, like, is that not the golden opportunity to get the feedback you need to see whether you're under-delivering or over-delivering? And also you're getting used to presenting this before you actually go and do that show or that thing that you're booked for. Is that not the easiest way of doing it?
I would say it is. Yeah, you're right. It's really important to get that feedback. And I think an important distinguishment there is, if you think it's too much, test it. If you think it's not enough, add more and then test it. Because if you think you've taken out too much, like I had, I was thinking like, oh, I felt guilty because that was my only connection, this space theme. Like, I had the ending to my show, which, albeit was a big ending, but it felt like there wasn't enough. And what I should have done is actually run it through, get that feedback, and then adjust. Or, like as I said, I should have added more theme, tested it, and then taken it back out. Because it might be the case that I was just wrong and I had the right approach. But testing it is going to be so much more important. than just doing it and getting that feedback. It's something that I know we've spoken about previously on the podcast and our live streams on social media and all of that kind of stuff. But getting that feedback is going to be absolutely fundamental. Talk to your clients. More importantly, ignore your clients and talk to your audience after your shows. If you get booked in for a show, great, but you've got however many people there that are points of feedback that you can ask. Did that feel too Christmassy, or was that too Halloweeny, or was that theme too like of it? Get their honest feedback, because that's the only way you're going to improve your show. And you're completely right.
Yeah, it's the best way to grow. Like, and we've already discussed actually. Like, you're set listening to this podcast because we have a golden way. Like, we've discussed it in the how to practice episodes. Who do you practice on, and who are the best people to practice, and who's going to give the most honest advice? Like, you're all set. Like, I don't think there's any more we need to tell you now. Like, we've told you all about the topical shows, the seasonal shows, the fact that you need to actually be confident in what you're doing, and everything in between, going through the cringy themes and like how not to underplay it. And I think another point of underplaying it is actually linking to something that I mentioned at the beginning, and that is having the confidence to actually go in with a thing that you're doing and be the show, be the person doing that show, and thrive in that environment. I think that's the real only other tip I can give to actually play the shows properly and not under deliver.
Exactly that. And I realize at this point this is a very deep look in terms of all things generalized in terms of these topical shows. So just to sort of recap in that sense, we spoke about seasonal shows, so those Christmas or Halloweeny themed shows that happen so often. Should you do them? Well, yes, you should do them if you want to do them, but don't feel pressured to. Then in terms of actually embedding these themes, sometimes we put too much of it and we tailor every single trick or routine to the theme, when actually that is neglecting the overall impact of our shows. So scale it back, take it out in some places, just build from a solid show and then add the theme, and you'll be able to do a much better, a much more powerful show in that sense. But when you're taking things out, obviously, there will come a point that you take out too much of the theme and you've just got a regular show. So if you need to, scale it back and then test it. If you need to just test it first of all, run the show once for family, friends, run the individual routines once for family and friends, get their immediate feedback, and then adjust and go from there. It should always be a cycle of perform, rehearse, and then get that feedback and then perform and go through it over and over and over. And that's the way you're going to absolutely dominate in the world of seasonal and topical shows. But with that said, I do kind of want to throw a reference out now that we've absolutely slammed and appreciated topical and seasonal events. All About the Tricks 4 is coming very soon, where we are actually doing our Christmas special. And in this Christmas special for All About the Tricks 4, we're going to be sharing a bunch of material. So usually the dedicated listeners will be aware that our All About the Tricks series is designed to do a deep dive on a single trick, where you'll be able to join the lecture, and then leaving that lecture, you'll have a completely new approach that you can use immediately to that specific topical theme. But I'm not going to say too much, but this month is Christmas special. We've got loads of content. All you need to do is simply check the show notes of this episode. So on Apple and I think on Spotify, you swipe up on your mobile device and you'll be able to find the links from there and get yourselves booked in for that awesome Christmas extravaganza. But Ashley, have we missed anything?
Yes, we have.
Any final words?
All you got to do is subscribe to stay up to date with all of our awesome content. And we'll see you guys next week, where we want to talk about using emotions.